Some weapons were built to win wars. These were built to make historians rub their eyes and ask if everyone in the room had been kicked by a horse. Today, 33 of the dumbest weapons people really used, from rocket wheels that attacked their own side to nuclear bombs warmed by chickens. Yes, chickens. Humanity survived history mostly by accident. 1. The Great Panjandrum was Britain's attempt to weaponize a giant runaway cheese wheel, except the cheese was explosives and the dairy department had clearly been drinking. During World War II, British engineers needed a device that could roll across a beach, smash through German defenses, and explode with heroic purpose. So they built a huge wooden wheel packed with explosives and strapped rockets around its edges. In theory, it would charge forward like a flaming bulldog of democracy. In reality, the rockets fired unevenly. The wheel wobbled across the sand like a drunk circus prop, and during tests it turned around and chased its own creators. Soldiers scattered. Officers ran. A cameraman probably reconsidered every life choice. Imagine inventing a bomb so stupid it immediately defects from your army and attacks management first. 2. Blue Peacock sounds like a fancy cocktail, but it was actually a British Cold War nuclear landmine because apparently regular landmine did not contain enough nightmare seasoning. The plan was to bury nuclear devices in West Germany, so if Soviet forces invaded, Britain could detonate them and turn key routes into radioactive bad news. Then engineers noticed a small issue. Underground nuclear electronics get cold, and Cold War weapons apparently needed to be tucked in like fussy toddlers. One proposed solution was to seal live chickens inside the bomb with food and water, using their body heat to keep it warm. Yes, the safety system was poultry. Not a thermostat, not a heater, not a sane meeting with adults in the room. A chicken. Somewhere in a government office, a man in a suit said, "Gentlemen, the atomic bomb needs livestock." And nobody immediately threw him out the window. 3. The duck's foot. Pistol was a gun for people who wanted to shoot everywhere except, inconveniently, straight ahead. Popular in the 18th and 19th centuries, it had several barrels spread outward like the toes of a duck, creating a firearm that looked like it had stepped on a rake. The idea was simple. If you were surrounded by attackers, one pull of the trigger could fire in multiple directions. Great in a crowd. Less great if your main problem was the one angry person directly in front of you. It was used by ship captains, prison guards, and anyone whose tactical plan was basically panic in all directions. Accuracy was not the selling point. The selling point was emotional damage. You did not aim the duck's foot pistol. You presented it to the room and let chaos fill out the paperwork. 4. The Vespa 150. TAP was what happened when the French military looked at a charming little scooter and thought, this needs an anti-tank gun. In the 1950s, French airborne troops needed light vehicles they could drop by parachute, so engineers mounted a large recoilless rifle onto a Vespa scooter. The final result looked like a pizza delivery driver had been radicalized by artillery. To be fair, soldiers were not supposed to fire the cannon while riding, because even military optimism has a tiny emergency brake. They were meant to dismount, set up the weapon, and then attack enemy armor. But the image is still perfect. A tiny scooter carrying a weapon designed to ruin tanks. It is like putting a shark fin on a bathtub and calling it naval superiority. Cute, mobile, and completely unprepared for how ridiculous it looked. 5. Incendiary pigs are one of those ancient weapons that make you realize history was not always grand strategy and marble statues. Sometimes it was just people yelling, "Light the pig!" War elephants were terrifying in ancient battle, especially if your army had never met a moving building with tusks. Some ancient accounts describe armies using pigs against elephants because elephants supposedly hated the squealing. The nastier version involved coating pigs in flammable material, setting them alight, and driving them toward the elephants to cause panic. It was cruel, chaotic, and absolutely the kind of idea that belongs on a clay tablet titled Bad Decisions Volume 1. The logic was not completely random, because frightened elephants could trample their own side. But still, imagine being the military planner whose contribution to civilization was weaponized barbecue with legs. Rome built roads, laws, aqueducts, and also this horrifying farm-based panic button. 6. The Novgorod circular ship was Russia's attempt to build a battleship shaped like a coin, because normal ships were apparently too committed to having a front. Launched in the 1870s, it was designed as a round coastal defense vessel with heavy armor and big guns. The theory was that a circular hull could support massive weight and be hard to sink. The reality was that it handled like a metal dinner plate having an identity crisis. Steering was awkward, speed was miserable, and popular legend claimed that firing the guns made it spin like a top. That part is probably exaggerated, but the ship's reputation for poor handling was very real. It was less a proud warship and more a floating manhole cover with cannons. If the enemy attacked from any direction, technically the Novgorod was ready. Unfortunately, it was not especially ready to go in any direction. 7. Anti-aircraft flamethrowers were born from the kind of battlefield brainstorming session where someone says, "Planes are in the sky, fire goes up, meeting adjourned." During the early age of military aviation, armies were desperate for ways to stop aircraft, especially low-flying ones. One idea was to point enormous flamethrowers upward and blast burning fuel toward the sky. In theory, the aircraft would fly through fire and regret becoming modern. In practice, gravity remained undefeated. Flaming liquid does not politely continue upward forever. Once it loses momentum, it comes back down, sometimes in flaming droplets, often toward the people who launched it. Congratulations, you have invented weather that hates you. Even if everything worked perfectly, hitting a moving plane with a vertical river of fire was extremely optimistic. It was not so much air defense as a barbecue accident with uniforms. 8. The Gyrojet pistol looked like the future had arrived, tripped over a cable and knocked itself unconscious. Developed in the 1960s, it fired tiny rocket projectiles instead of normal bullets. That sounds amazing because tiny rockets are objectively cooler than tiny chunks of metal. But rockets need distance to accelerate. At very close range, a gyrojet projectile could leave the barrel moving so slowly that people famously claimed it could be stopped with a finger. That is not a phrase any gun wants on its resume. The weapon also had accuracy problems, reliability problems, and cost problems, because why fail cheaply when you can fail in a space-age way? At longer distances, the rockets gained speed, but by then the shooter also needed them to go where they were aimed. The Gyrojet was stylish, futuristic, and deeply committed to disappointing everyone with a science degree. 9. The Antonov A-40 was the Soviet attempt to make a tank fly, and not metaphorically, not poetically, not fast across the battlefield fly. They literally strapped giant glider wings to a tank. During World War II, Soviet planners wanted to deliver tanks to partisans behind enemy lines, so they took a light tank, attached wooden wings and a tail, and planned to tow it into the air. After release, it would glide down, land, drop the wings, and become a regular tank again. That sounds like a child explaining warfare after eating too much sugar. The test flight technically happened, but the whole thing was too heavy. The towing aircraft struggled, and the tank was helpless in the air. It flew in the same way furniture flies during a tornado, briefly, badly, and against everyone's better judgment. The flying tank was brave, bizarre, and aerodynamic only in a courtroom argument. 10. The Urumi is an ancient Indian weapon that looks like a sword went through a rebellious teenager phase and became a metal whip. Instead of a stiff blade, it has one or more flexible steel strips that lash around the wielder in deadly arcs. In expert hands, it could be terrifying because the blade could curve around shields and strike from unexpected angles. But those words, expert hands, are carrying the entire building. For anyone else, the Urumi was basically a self-harming ribbon with ambition. One bad motion, one mistimed swing, one dramatic flourish too many, and congratulations, you have attacked yourself with historical elegance. It required intense training, discipline, and the kind of body awareness usually reserved for dancers and people carrying soup through a crowd. Beautiful? Yes. Deadly? Absolutely. Beginner-friendly? Only if your beginner goal was immediate regret with blood effects. 11. The Davy Crockett nuclear weapon was the United States military asking the deeply cursed question, what if a bazooka could make a mushroom cloud? Developed during the Cold War, It was a recoilless weapon that fired a small nuclear warhead. Small is relative here, like calling a crocodile a spicy lizard. The idea was to stop advancing Soviet forces with a portable atomic blast. The problem was that radiation does not respect motivational speeches. Depending on conditions, the dangerous radioactive zone could threaten the same troops who had just fired the weapon, especially because the effective range was not exactly generous for something nuclear. Imagine being handed a battlefield device and told, "Use this carefully because success might also ruin your afternoon permanently." It was portable, tactical, and completely insane in that special Cold War way where every solution was just a bigger apocalypse with handles. 12. The lantern shield was a Renaissance weapon for the fighter who looked at a normal shield and thought, "This needs a glove, spikes, a blade, and maybe home lighting." It was essentially a shield loaded with accessories, sometimes including a gauntlet, stabbing points, a sword blade, and a small lantern meant to blind or distract an opponent in darkness. The concept has strong Swiss Army knife designed by a raccoon energy. In theory, you could block, punch, stab, and dazzle someone with light. In practice, you were carrying a heavy metal dinner tray full of hardware while trying not to be murdered. More features do not always mean more useful. Sometimes they mean your arm is now responsible for a medieval garage sale. The lantern shield is fascinating, inventive, and ridiculous, like a flashlight taped to a frying pan during a sword fight. 13. The double-barreled cannon from the American Civil War was designed with a plan so dramatic it almost deserved background music. It was supposed to fire 2 cannonballs connected by a chain, sending them spinning through enemy lines like a giant metal jump rope of doom. The catch was that both barrels had to fire at exactly the same moment. They often did not, because 19th century artillery was not known for perfect synchronized choreography. When one side fired slightly before the other, the chain behaved unpredictably, whipping through trees, chimneys, fields, and innocent architecture. It was less devastating battlefield innovation and more public safety announcement with smoke. Reports say it terrified locals during testing more than it threatened enemy troops. The weapon still survives as a monument, which is appropriate. It is not honoring military genius. It is honoring the moment someone discovered timing matters. 14. The FP-45 Liberator pistol was a World War II resistance weapon designed to be cheap, simple, and disposable, which is a polite way of saying it was built with the emotional depth of a stapler. The United States made it for people in occupied territories, hoping they could use it at close range to ambush an enemy soldier and steal a better gun. That last part was basically the whole strategy. This gun's best feature was helping you acquire a different gun. It fired one shot, reloaded painfully slowly, had crude sights, and looked like something assembled by a factory that had somewhere else to be. The famous joke is that it could take longer to reload than to manufacture. Imagine standing in danger, fumbling with your tiny metal disappointment, while the enemy politely waits for your industrial efficiency to catch up. The Liberator was not a firearm. It was a starter coupon for violence. 15. The Tsar Tank was Russia's World War I monster vehicle that looked like a giant armored tricycle, designed by someone who had only heard rumors about tanks. It had 2 enormous front wheels, each taller than a house, and a tiny rear wheel that made the whole machine look like a cannon carriage after a growth spurt. The giant wheels were supposed to roll over trenches and obstacles, because bigger wheels obviously solve all problems, especially if you ignore mud, weight, balance, engines, and reality. During testing, the small rear wheel sank into soft ground, and the entire machine got stuck. Not destroyed, not outmaneuvered, just stuck, like a shopping cart in wet cement. It sat there as a gigantic monument to overconfidence. The Tsar Tank was not defeated by enemy fire. It was defeated by dirt, which is embarrassing because dirt does not even have a budget. 16. The number 74 sticky grenade was a British anti-tank weapon from World War II that tried to defeat armored vehicles with the power of glue and extreme optimism. It had a glass explosive body covered in strong adhesive, protected by an outer casing until use. A soldier was supposed to expose the sticky surface, throw it onto a tank, and let the grenade cling before exploding. That sounds clever until you remember battlefields are made of mud, rain, dust, smoke, torn uniforms, and panic. The grenade could stick to the wrong surface, fail to stick to dirty armor, or in the worst comic horror version, attach itself to the person throwing it. Also, using it required getting very close to an enemy tank, which is generally considered a bold way to shorten your biography. The sticky grenade was brave and desperate, but its main tactical question was, what if the bomb gets clingy? 17. The Leiomano, a traditional Hawaiian shark-tooth weapon, was absolutely terrifying in the right context and completely allergic to modern armor. Made from wood and lined with real shark teeth, it created a jagged cutting edge that could slash flesh in a brutal way. This was not silly in its original environment. It used available materials intelligently, and shark teeth are naturally sharp enough to ruin your day with enthusiasm. But compared with steel blades, shark teeth have one major weakness: they can break. Hit something too hard, too dense, or too armored, and those teeth can snap or come loose. So you had a weapon that was vicious, frightening, and also required the maintenance schedule of a nightmare comb. It was part club, part saw, part ocean predator souvenir. Deadly? Absolutely. Convenient? Not exactly. Nothing says battle readiness, like checking whether your weapon needs replacement shark parts. 18. The Krummlauf was a German World War II attachment designed to let soldiers shoot around corners, which sounds brilliant until you remember, bullets are not tiny dogs that can be trained to turn left. It was a curved barrel extension fitted to assault rifles, sometimes paired with a mirror sight so the shooter could stay behind cover. In theory, genius. In practice, physics walked into the room carrying a hammer. Forcing a bullet through a curved barrel caused extreme stress. Bullets could deform or shatter, accuracy suffered, and the attachment wore out quickly. Some versions had a very short service life before becoming expensive scrap. It was the kind of invention that looks amazing in a diagram and then becomes deeply rude when metal, heat, pressure, and speed get involved. The Krummlauf did let you shoot around corners, technically. It also let your gun slowly eat itself. 19. The Bob Semple tank was New Zealand's emergency tank project during World War II, and it had the vibe of a tractor trying to cosplay as a battleship. New Zealand feared invasion and did not have a major tank industry, so the solution was to use available tractors and cover them in corrugated metal. Yes, roofing iron. The same energy as building a submarine out of garden sheds. The result was tall, awkward, cramped, poorly armored, and visually unforgettable. It had machine guns and patriotic ambition, but it was not exactly going to terrify a professional armored division, unless they had a strong fear of agricultural equipment. To be fair, it came from genuine desperation, and desperate countries use what they have. But the Bob Semple tank looked like it should be defending a barn from raccoons, not stopping an invasion. It was courage wearing a tin roof. 20. The Apache revolver was a 19th century French street weapon that combined a revolver, a folding knife, and brass knuckles into one device because apparently committing to one bad idea lacked ambition. Used by criminals in Paris, it looked sinister and compact, like something a villain would pull from a coat before immediately disappointing himself. The revolver was weak and inaccurate because it had no proper barrel. The knife was short and awkward. The brass knuckles were attached to a folding metal contraption that was not comfortable to grip. It was a 3-in-1 weapon where all three components were quietly asking to be separate. The Apache revolver is what happens when someone invents a multi-tool for violence and forgets that multi-tools usually do everything slightly worse. It was not a gun, knife, or knuckle duster. It was a pocket-sized group project where nobody did their part. 21. Fire lances were ancient Chinese gunpowder weapons, and historically they were extremely important because they helped lead toward true firearms. But early versions also had strong, dangerous fireworks taped to a spear energy. A fire lance usually involved a bamboo or metal tube filled with gunpowder attached near the end of a spear. When ignited, it blasted flame, smoke, sparks, and sometimes pellets or fragments toward the enemy. In theory, it was terrifying. In practice, early gunpowder could be inconsistent, range was short, and the person holding it was standing very close to a tube full of angry chemistry. It could scare enemies and animals, create confusion, and burn at close range. It could also blind, smoke out, or frighten the user, which is not ideal unless your battle plan includes self-seasoning. The fire lance was not useless. It was the awkward teenage phase before guns learned manners. 22. The Colibri. 2.7mm pistol was the smallest commercially available handgun ever made, and it looked like something a wealthy mosquito would keep for home defense. Created in the early 20th century, it fired a cartridge so tiny that the bullet had almost no stopping power. It was a real firearm, yes, but real is doing a lot of emotional support work here. The projectile was so weak that thick clothing could seriously reduce its effect, meaning a heavy winter coat might have been better armor than actual bravery. It was easy to conceal, but also difficult to grip, difficult to aim, and deeply unimpressive once fired. The sound probably did more psychological damage than the bullet. The Colibri is fascinating engineering, but as a weapon it feels like a gun designed by someone who misunderstood the phrase small arms and took it personally. 23. The Panzer VIII Maus was Hitler's super heavy tank, and the name means mouse, which is one of history's greatest accidental jokes. This thing weighed around 188 tons, making it the heaviest fully enclosed armored fighting vehicle ever built. It had enormous armor, a huge gun, and the mobility of a bank vault being dragged through pudding. The problem with building a tank this heavy is that suddenly the entire planet becomes an obstacle. Bridges could not support it. Mud loved it. Transporting it was a logistical nightmare. Fuel consumption was absurd. If it broke down, recovering it required equipment that basically had to be a second miracle. Only prototypes were completed, and they never changed the war. The Maus was meant to be unstoppable, but it forgot that stopping yourself is still stopping. It was not a mouse. It was a steel hippopotamus with delusions. 24. The scissor Qatar was an Indian punch dagger that decided one blade was too emotionally modest. A regular Qatar already looks intense, with a blade extending forward from a grip held in the fist. The scissor version added side blades that could spring open when the handle was squeezed, turning one stabbing weapon into a sudden three-bladed surprise. Visually, it was spectacular. It looked like a flower blooming in a nightmare garden. The idea was to widen wounds, trap an opponent's weapon, or simply scare the soul out of anyone standing nearby. But in close combat, moving parts are always suspicious. Dirt, impact, armor, poor maintenance, or one unlucky strike could damage the mechanism. A simple blade is reliable because it has one job and no personality. The scissor Qatar had drama, style, and a strong chance of becoming a broken magic trick at the worst moment. 25. The knock volley gun was an 18th century British naval firearm with 7 barrels that fired together, because someone looked at recoil and said, "Make it personal." Designed for shipboard fighting, it was supposed to blast enemy sailors during boarding actions with one terrifying pull of the trigger. In theory, that is a lot of firepower. In practice, it was also a lot of shoulder punishment. All 7 barrels firing at once produced brutal recoil, making the weapon painful and difficult to control. Sailors already had enough problems at sea without being physically assaulted by their own gun. There were also concerns about sparks and flames around sails, rigging, and wooden ships, which are famously not improved by random fire. Reloading was slow, aiming was awkward, and firing it was like being kicked by a cannon with commitment issues. The knock gun brought overwhelming force to exactly one target, the shooter. 26. The shield guns of Henry VIII were Tudor England's attempt to combine defense and offense into one bulky object, because apparently a shield was not heavy enough until you jammed a firearm into it. These round shields had a small gun built through the middle, letting a soldier theoretically block attacks and shoot back. On paper, that sounds clever. On an actual battlefield, it sounds like trying to aim a door. Early firearms were slow, smoky, unreliable, and awkward to reload. Shields were heavy and meant for movement, blocking, and survival. Combine them, and now your arm is holding a defensive plate with a bad little cannon poking through it like an angry doorbell. Some may have been used by guards or specialized troops, but the design never became a battlefield revolution. It was a Renaissance gadget with royal confidence and gym equipment energy. Great conversation piece, terrible arm day. 27. The Shosha machine gun has one of the ugliest reputations of World War I, and while some of that reputation is debated, its flaws were very real and very muddy. It was a French automatic rifle meant to give infantry portable firepower, which was actually a forward-thinking idea. The problem was execution. Its magazine had large open sides, which might sound fine until you place it in a trench. Trenches were basically mud hotels with artillery service. Dirt, water, and debris could get into the magazine and help jam the weapon, which is awkward because machine guns are most appreciated when they continue being machine guns. Some versions also suffered from poor manufacturing and ammunition issues. The Shosha tried to bring mobile automatic fire to the battlefield, but it also brought an open invitation for trench filth to move in rent-free. It was innovation wearing a clogged drain. 28. The Tsar Pushka, also known as the Tsar Cannon, was built in Moscow in 1586 and remains one of the greatest examples of a weapon whose main job was to stand there looking enormous. It is massive, ornate, and deeply committed to intimidation. If you saw it as an ambassador, you would immediately become polite. But as a practical battlefield cannon, it was more complicated. It was too huge and heavy to move or aim easily, and it never fired a shot in war. The enormous cannonballs displayed beside it are decorative and not what it would realistically have used. Its real power was psychological, a giant bronze message saying, "We may not fire this, but please imagine if we did." The Tsar Cannon was less an artillery piece and more a national flex with a barrel. Basically, 16th century Russia invented military peacocking in metal form. 29. Sword pistols were early modern weapons that tried to solve two problems at once and created a third problem called, "This thing is awkward." The concept was simple. Attach a pistol to a sword so one weapon could shoot at range and slash up close. That sounds incredible if you are a child drawing weapons in a notebook. Actual combat is less forgiving. A good sword needs balance, speed, and control. A pistol from the 16th or 17th century was heavy, slow, smoky, and often unreliable. Fuse them together, and you could end up with a blade that swung badly and a gun that aimed badly. After firing once, you had a hot, smoky, off-balance lump attached to your sword. Many examples were more showpiece than practical battlefield tool. Rich people loved fancy weapon mashups, because apparently money has always been vulnerable to nonsense with engravings. 30. The PIAT was a British anti-tank weapon from World War II, and it functioned partly through a massive spring, because nothing says modern warfare like fighting a tank with angry furniture hardware. It used a spigot mortar system to launch an explosive bomb, and it had some real advantages. It produced little backblast, meaning it could be fired from enclosed spaces more safely than some rocket weapons. It could also damage tanks, so it was not useless. But preparing it was famously unpleasant. Cocking the weapon could require the soldier to lie down, brace it with the feet, and pull with serious force until the mechanism locked. This is not ideal when the user is cold, exhausted, terrified, and being targeted by machine guns. The PIAT asked infantrymen to defeat armored vehicles after completing a full-body resistance workout. It was a weapon and a fitness test with explosives. 31. The T-35 tank was the Soviet Union's giant multi-turret land battleship, built in the 1930s with 5 turrets because apparently one tank needed an entire apartment complex of guns. On parade, it looked terrifying. It was huge, dramatic, and covered in weapons, exactly the kind of machine that makes crowds clap and mechanics quietly cry. In battle, the problems arrived immediately. It was slow, mechanically unreliable, difficult to command, and almost impossible to coordinate properly. The commander had to manage multiple gunners, multiple fields of fire, bad visibility, noise, confusion, and the normal battlefield problem of everyone trying not to die. More turrets did not mean more efficiency. It meant more people needing instructions inside a steel box that already moved like a tired elevator. The T-35 was not a tank with extra firepower. It was a committee meeting with tracks. 32. The so-called holy water sprinkler was a nickname used for spiked maces, because medieval people enjoyed naming skull-crushing objects like church equipment. Some experimental versions or related oddities went even further by hiding a gun barrel inside a mace head. The idea was deliciously dramatic. Swing it like a club or fire it like a gun. Unfortunately, real weapons enjoy simplicity. A mace works because it is heavy, solid, and rude. Hollowing out space for a barrel or mechanism could weaken the head, while early firearms were already slow, smoky, and temperamental. So now you had a crushing weapon with delicate internal features, which is like putting a glass chandelier inside a sledgehammer. If the gun failed, you were carrying an awkward mace. If the mace cracked, you had a broken gun on a stick. It was not holy water. It was medieval over-engineering wearing spikes. 33. The Macuahuitl was the famous Aztec weapon made from a wooden club lined with razor-sharp obsidian blades, and it deserves more respect than most dumb weapon lists give it. Obsidian can be insanely sharp, sharper than many steel edges at the microscopic level, and against unarmored flesh, the Macuahuitl was absolutely devastating. Spanish accounts describe it with real fear, so this was not some decorative paddle from a museum gift shop. But it had a weakness built into its brilliance. Obsidian is volcanic glass. Extremely sharp glass, yes, but still glass. Against flesh, terrifying. Against hard armor, shields, or steel weapons, those cutting edges could chip, snap, or shatter. In its own world, it made sense. Against European metal armor, it became fragile. The Macuahuitl was deadly, beautiful, and horrifying, but one bad hit could turn your elite weapon into a wooden club with expensive black sprinkles. So now I want to fight in the comments. Which weapon here was actually secretly brilliant, and which one was so stupid its inventor should have been banned from touching metal forever? And if we missed an even dumber historical weapon, name it. Not a bad sword, I want museum-grade stupidity. Like the video if at least one of these made you question civilization, and subscribe before somebody straps a cannon to another scooter.